Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to join me today as we discuss how to fund educational programs. My name is Stephanie Bailey, and it's a pleasure to work on behalf of all of you at the Delta Upsilon Educational Foundation. I'd like to start today by just giving you an overview of how we're going to spend our time together. One quick housekeeping item, wanted to make sure that you know that right now, all the attendees are in mute mode. I'm going to go ahead and give the presentation, and when we get to the end, I will unmute everyone and you'll have the opportunity to either ask questions over the phone line, or there's also a chat function in the webinar software that you could use if you'd rather just send a question in. So again, thanks for taking time out of your schedule today. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to talk about how could you fund educational programs. So we'll begin with a little bit of an overview, and I'm going to introduce myself in just a moment. We're going to talk a little bit about the DU Educational Foundation. Then we will move to discussing the Chapter Legacy Plan, which is the specific program we're going to visit about today to achieve funding for educational program attendance forever. We'll spend a little bit of time chatting about how you could partner with DUEF to open a CLP. That's, of course, we have to have a good acronym, right? So CLP, short for Chapter Legacy Plan. And then we'll talk about who has existing chapter legacy plans, who are chapters that we're beginning to work with on plans. And then last but not least, as promised, we'll leave time for any questions and doing a quick wrap up. So before we jump in, I always think it's nice to know who you're listening to. As I said, my name is Stephanie. Several of you on the phone I have met. Some of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet. But real quickly, I joined the DUEF team a little bit over a year ago and have spent the last year traveling the country, visiting with just phenomenal DU alumni in all areas of the country. On a day-to-day basis, I help Justin run the operations of the DUEF team and the organization. And then most of my time is spent traveling and focusing specifically on working with donors who have an interest in making a major gift. And so, as a function of that, I spend a lot of my time talking about the opportunity for donors to invest back in their own chapters through our Chapter Legacy Plan program, which clearly we'll spend time on. I came to DU by way of spending the last decade or so in association management and was the executive director for my own sorority, Alpha Gamma Delta. And during that time, about 5 or 6 years ago, I got a call from Justin, who invited me to sit on the president's task force. And if you recall, that was a group of people that was established under the leadership of then President Bernard Franklin. And our task was to take a look at what does DU need to be going forward to remain relevant both to the men who are joining the organization and as well as relevant and complementary to their experience on colleges and universities across the country. That was my first interaction with the organization. It was fantastic. And it's been really exciting to watch as I was still doing my work at Alpha Gamma Delta, exciting to watch the DU staff and volunteers put into place steps and actions to achieve that strategic plan. And so now we find ourselves with working on how do we continue to fund that plan. And the work that we're doing over at DUF is clearly a big piece of that. So it's been very exciting to move over to DU in the past year and have the opportunity to work as a staff member on seeing the execution of the plan as set forth by the President's task force. Additionally, before I came to DU, I spent all my time in corporate side of life, working for the likes of General Motors and McKesson in a variety of roles from sales and marketing to business development, and then also spent a fair amount of time in corporate training of sales teams. So there's a little bit of all those pieces that comes into play in my current role here at DU. And I also just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you on the line who are donors to DUEF. I know many of you are. We very much appreciate your gifts. They enable us to continue to do the work to provide young men a fantastic leadership development experience, as well as offer scholarships to them to help defray costs of attending college these days. And I would definitely be remiss if I didn't say thank you for the work that you do as volunteers. During my time working professionally in corporate roles, I volunteered for my own organization every time I moved around the country, and have had a variety of roles, both locally, including chapter advisor at a couple of different universities, and then some regional roles. And currently, it's an honor to serve my membership on our international board of directors. So I appreciate the work that you all do every single day to help ensure that the men currently in DU chapters are having an incredible experience. So enough about me. You came to hear about how to fund educational programs. So let's jump into that. I thought it would be helpful to just give a really quick overview about the work that DUEF does and how it's different from the fraternity, but absolutely complementary. To some of you, this will be familiar. To some of you, this may help clarify. So DUEF is what we would call a 501c3 charitable organization. And so what that means is the IRS has said, we recognize you as an organization that is raising money to put towards very specific charitable purposes. In our world, of course, those purposes are education, scholarship, and philanthropy. What I think is fantastic about DUEF is that it is the only organization that raises money exclusively to support DU fraternity members. Many other charitable organizations do great work and may support their DUEF members as well as other outside interests. And as you well know, the DUEF is solely focused on supporting and providing education and resources for DU members. As I've already highlighted, our work involves providing funding for scholarships, philanthropic activities, which of course we know is the Global Service Initiative, and leadership development programs. The donations that we receive through DUEF by virtue of us being a charitable organization are tax deductible for the people who are generously giving those gifts. So with that, again, another just high-level overview. We have a lot of different funds held at DUEF, and that continues to grow seemingly almost every week, which is very exciting for the work that we're trying to do. And I thought it would be helpful to just give you a quick overview of those funds. So hopefully you're all familiar with the annual loyalty fund. This is what we would call our general fund. So we start back at zero every year. We're working to fundraise all throughout the year. Again, many of you have been generous donors to that fund, so we appreciate it. And it's really the fund that aids in the operation of the foundation. So it provides for the day-to-day operational expenses that's necessary to have people and resources to run the organization so that we can raise more money and provide more grants and financial opportunities through scholarships, leadership programs, etc. Many groups, individual chapters, have what we know as a chapter educational account. So I like to think of this as a bit of a bank account that is held at headquarters through DUEF. Of course, it allows alumni to contribute from a tax deductible standpoint to earmark that money specifically for their chapter's educational account, and for the money in those educational accounts to go to support sending men to programs and having educational opportunities. Those are pretty much funds where the money comes in It's held, and then when it's time to register men for programs or help support them getting to programs, you contact us, and as many of you are familiar, we help you make a withdrawal from that or transfer funds to pay for those educational costs. One of the other areas that has grown quite a bit in the past few years are the housing accounts. So, some of you may be familiar with the idea that the IRS will allow tax deductible contributions to be made to DUEF and grants then made back out to local housing corporations for housing purposes. Now, the caveat, and this is a really important piece, is that remember, our charitable qualification is based on education and philanthropy and scholarship. So that applies to the housing area as well. So when you take a look at doing a housing project, any area of the physical facility that can be deemed educational in nature, a library, a study room, desks in bedrooms, all of the items or the floor space, if you will, that can be educational in nature is eligible to be funded through a grant from DUEF. So again, we could accept donations. We then can issue grants back out to the local groups, ensuring that the funding that they're requesting is going specifically for educational purposes. The next area, as you're all familiar with, is the work that we do around scholarships. Many of the groups have individual scholarship funds that alumni have either contributed to on an annual basis, or perhaps someone has been generous enough to endow a scholarship. And so those funds are available year in and year out to the young men of an individual chapter. Of course, there's also fundraising that we're doing to provide scholarships for Oak Circle, as well as scholarships to attend Greek-wide educational programs such as UIFI offered through the NIC. Last but not least, some groups, some chapters, if you will, have endowed program funds, and we have some funds held at headquarters that we can use to provide support to young men who are attending educational programs. So maybe this looks like the Louisville chapter has an endowed fund for the dual program, meaning that an alum has endowed a fund so that every year one young man from Louisville has his expenses paid to attend dual. So that's a quick overview of the types of funds. The one fund that's not on here, which is where we're going to spend the majority of our time today, is the Chapter Legacy Plan. So let's set the stage for that discussion. As you're all aware, and this really ties back to that President's Task Force and the strategic plan execution that I was talking about earlier, over the past few years, DU has done a tremendous amount of work in retooling, recrafting, really shoring up the DU educational leadership experiences. And so on the screen, you're seeing names you're all familiar with, everything from taking our youngest leaders up to Massachusetts to give them a powerful experience called Dual, Emerging Leaders Experience, to the President's Academy, Global Service Initiative, of course, more widely attended Leadership Institute that happens in the summer. We've got our regional leadership academies for officers, and then the opportunity for individual chapters to have Building Better Men retreats. And all of this has been tremendous work. All the programs are now in place, have been for a couple of years. And as you're particularly familiar, since you're working directly with undergraduate men, we've been asking as an international organization for you all to continue to support these programs by ensuring that we get men to attend. We're also starting to find through the data that we're tracking that the chapters who are sending men to programs on a regular basis and really embracing all that DU International is offering through education, those are the chapters we're starting to see a trend line. Those are the chapters that are performing better. They're more operationally sound. They have mitigated some loss prevention issues. They're becoming stronger recruiters. So all in all, we are excited not only to have the individual response we get from the men attending the programs, but to really start to track the impact that these programs are having on overall membership and chapter experience. That said, we realize that asking folks to be able to fund sending men to all these programs every year is that's a commitment, both financially and time commitment. So here's the challenge. We're asking you to increase program attendance. We recognize that asking for scholarship registration fees for all these programs to be built into the chapter budget can get a little bit tricky. If they're not built into the chapter budget to pay to support men attending programs, then we know that means that the local alumni, many of you on the phone, are in a constant state of trying to raise money to put into your CEA account so you then can cover the expense of sending these young men. The last piece that you may not be as familiar with, but that we see day in and day out as we're visiting with donors, is that we know that, understandably so, donors really like to contribute directly to their chapter. So I want to give a gift and I want to know how my chapter at Iowa or at Michigan or at San Jose State can directly benefit. And so one of the other pieces that we found was, how do we at DUEF create an opportunity for local investment? So we started thinking about all four of these different challenge areas. And the solution to this is what we now call the Chapter Legacy Plan. So the Chapter Legacy Plan, in brief, when completely funded, is a $150,000 endowment. That $150,000 endowment will then provide the scholarship opportunities that you see here on your screen every single year. So 12 men every year get to attend a mix of these four programs. And again, that is in perpetuity. Couple of notes on the 150,000. You have however much time it takes to achieve getting the fund fully endowed. There's no expectation that that would happen in a year or even 2 years. However, as the fund reaches certain increments, we do start awarding program scholarships. So that certainly is incentive for all of us collectively to see the fund achieve its highest level of funding as quickly as possible. So how would you go about opening and funding one of these accounts? This really happens in one of two ways, and it doesn't matter how it comes about. So the first way it happens is that we on the DUEF staff team, who are traveling the country literally every week, meeting with alumni, we may find a donor or a prospective donor, if you will, who says, I really believe in educational programs. I like what you're telling me about the work that DU is doing. I'm particularly impressed that you can now prove that these programs are having a positive impact because you've shared the data with me. And I'd really like to do something, but I want to do it specific to my chapter. And so we talk through this, we learn about the donor, we uncover these areas of interest. And so then that can lead to a great discussion about what we're trying to accomplish with the Chapter Legacy Plan. And there have been many donors, you'll see in a minute what plans have been opened. There have been many donors who've said, that's great, that sounds exactly like something I'd like to make an investment in. So it could be that we're out working with a donor, and as a result of that, we're able to get the fund started. The other way this can happen is that local alumni, such as yourselves, hear about this plan, come to us, and we start talking about how could we partner to get a CLP open for your chapter. And then we begin the process. And we've really got a mix of how this has happened. Some of the ones that are opened, we've been the lead on because we found a right donor match. Other ones, local folks have come to us. So either way works for us. I will share with you, while this is not a requirement, what we have seen work best is funds that have historically had a few larger gifts to get them open and going. So we're always trying to think about where might there be opportunities for that 5-figure gift. I think it's important to know that our team is really here to provide fundraising efforts and support. This whole concept is not meant to be more fundraising that you have to do locally, but rather, how can we partner together? You help us make some connections with your alumni. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But we, the DUEF team, will take on the heavy lifting, if you will, of traveling around the country. We're out and about anyway, meeting with donors, and we'll tell the story of what's happening in your chapter. We'll talk about what we're trying to get accomplished through the chapter legacy plan. We will do the cultivation, we will do the solicitation and ask for the gift. We will do the stewardship afterwards once the donor has graciously made a commitment for the gift. So this is really an effort that we are leading on behalf of local chapters. There are a variety of approaches that groups have taken to doing this. So some groups have said, hey, we've got an anniversary event coming up. We'd like to have you come and make a presentation, either to everybody or to maybe a small subsection or to both, and talk a little bit about what's going on in the fraternity, the progress, the achievements, and help us set the stage for opening a chapter legacy plan. Other groups, it has really happened by sort of one by one. An individual donor has said, yes, I'll invest. And then we've worked with the next donor and the next donor. So in those scenarios, we may have several gifts before we talk about the fund more broadly, if you will. Another group has chosen to kick off at an event, but really to immediately reach out to all alumni. Sorry, that's the challenge of working in sorority land and fraternity land, is flipping back and forth from alumni and alumni. Another group has certainly taken a different approach of sending a letter to all their alumni and seeing what that might net. So there's a bunch of different ways we could go about starting the fund and working on the fund. And what's really important is that we just have a conversation about what we will think will work best. And I think it's important to say that we also want to find an approach that will work for what else is going on in the chapter. So at DUEF, we want to be very cognizant of the fact that a lot of folks are already doing local fundraising, whether that be for educational account, whether that be for ongoing housing, maintenance items, which are not, that business is not coming through DUEF, or it's perhaps even for a housing campaign. So we want the work we're doing to cultivate and solicit donors to be complementary and very cognizant of what's happening locally. I don't ever want us to feel like we're competing for donations, because that's not helpful to any of us. And I particularly sensitive to making sure that we're not confusing the donor. Last but not least, as I'm sure you've imagined, but I think it's worth underscoring, the funds for a chapter legacy plan are received and administered and managed through DUEF. So again, the great thing here is that we've got the 501c3 status to utilize to take those tax deductible funds. We have structures and systems in place to acknowledge funds, receipt for funds, tax mailings, all the things you're used to seeing from us. If you are a donor, all of that gets applied to the work that we do to support chapter legacy plans. All right, so let's talk for just a minute about what it might look like for you all to partner with us. And when you partner with us, as I was chatting about this earlier, it can take a variety of different forms. But most importantly, we've met some of the men from your chapters, but you are probably, or some of your other alumni are going to have better connections than we will have at this particular point. So what is most helpful for us is for you to be a connector. Again, we'll make the phone calls, we'll make the visits, but we need you to reach out and maybe say, hey, you're going to get a call from Stephanie, or you're going to get a call from Justin or from Colin. And we're working together on this project, and we'd really love it if you would accept the opportunity to have a visit. And they'll tell you all about it. Or oftentimes, I have alumni who will say, yes, Stephanie, sure, go ahead, use my name when you reach out, whether that be via email or phone. Let them know I said that you should call them. Again, that's just making a connection. You're utilizing your chapter brother or peer-to-peer relationship to hopefully help get us the opportunity to have a visit or have a conversation and talk about the work that we're doing. And most importantly, to just meet that brother and understand what type of philanthropy investments he and his family like to make, so that we can start to understand if the CLP might be appropriate. So the next thing that I want to take a look at, because everybody wants to know, well, who's got plans funded? There are two fully funded, Syracuse and Oregon. There are several that are in various stages of funding. So we've got Lafayette, San Jose State, Washington, Iowa State, NC State, Northwestern, Oklahoma, San Diego State, Illinois, Michigan, Nebraska, and Iowa. These funds have all been started. Several of these groups have been able to achieve enough in their fund as of this fiscal year for us to be able to award their first round of program scholarships. So, for example, San Jose State this year was able to send 8 men to RLA without incurring any registration cost, because that was all covered by their CLP. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are a couple of locations that we are starting to work with. So these are groups that we've had initial conversation with alumni and or individual donors, and we'll be working on these in the coming months. Texas, as you all are probably familiar, we just recolonized on that campus. Indiana, Bradley, Cornell, Bucknell, which is currently a closed chapter, but will be returning in fall of 18, and Kansas State. So we certainly, that is nobody that's on the phone right now. So we would love to add other schools and chapters to this list of groups that we are working with. And that concludes an overview of the CLP program. Hopefully that's given you a high level of understanding of what the program is all about. As I said, this is all about us doing the heavy lifting, but doing that in partnership and collaboration with you all, so that you have the opportunity to send men to the programs. The men can benefit. They can then bring the knowledge back to their chapter, have a stronger chapter experience, all as a result of the good work that we're collectively doing on behalf of Delta Upsilon. So at this point, I do certainly want to invite you, if you'd like to have a follow-up conversation one-on-one about where your group is at, or ideas of when we might be interested in starting a CLP and working together, you're certainly more than welcome to reach out to me. You can reach me at my email address, which is the same format as everybody else on staff, bailey@deltau.org. Or, because I do travel so much, honestly, the best place to call is just directly to my mobile phone. That's 317-979-7469. So at this point, I'm going to unmute everyone and also give you the opportunity for chatting, and we will see if we get any questions. All right, looks like I've got one question coming in here via chat. And that question is in regards to the breakdown of how much does it cost to send a student to each one of the programs that are included in the Chapter Legacy Plan. We do have that, of course. I think the best way for me to get this to you is just to put that in an email, and I will distribute it later. That way you're not all grabbing pens and trying to quickly scribble all this down. So I've got your registration and your emails. I will distribute this to the group who has attended, and then you can see what the individual costs are and then how that adds up. It adds up to, of course, multiple thousands of dollars a year. And the whole concept is, how can we alleviate you all from having to raise that, charge that through dues, etc., and ensure through a CLP that that funding is just there year after year. So thanks. That's a great question. Any other questions? All right, at this point, I'm seeing none and hearing none, so I am going to let you gentlemen get back to your day. Once again, thank you for your time. Thank you to those of you who are donors for sharing your financial gifts, and thank you to all of you for your volunteer time that you give graciously and generously to the men of DU. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.